Hello and welcome. We're going to talk today about the GPT to Work extension for Google Workspace. We're going to talk about how you can use ChatGPT directly in Google Sheets. Now, this has an amazing bunch of applications, and I'm super excited to share those with you. This is going to be a beginner's guide. So, we'll walk through the process of installing this add on and then go through different use cases that this can be applicable to. So, let's get started. So to install the GPT to Work add-on, you open a new Google Sheet or one that you want to implement these functionalities in. Go to the Extensions tab and then look for add-ons. Go to Get Add-ons and then in the search box, type GPT to Work. You're going to see our app or add-on pop up right here, and it gives you an option to install. Note that we have a bunch of helpful videos and tips here on the different things that you can do with the add-on. So feel free to go through these if you have extra questions. Um, so let's go install it. So the installer walks you through a bunch of steps, and here I'm just going to walk through this. You can see that it asks for the most restrictive permissions that it can operate with. It wants to manage and view the data that's in the spreadsheet in order to be able to process queries. It connects to an external service. In this case, it's the OpenAI API, which hosts ChatGPT. It also allows the app to display and run third-party web content in prompts and sidebars, so we can notify you of any changes. So with these permissions, you can go ahead and click Allow, and that's going to make sure this add-on is installed. Now, clicking on Additional Setup here, this takes you back to our website, which has setup instructions as well. For now, I'm just going to hit Done, and we should see the extension here. So um, the extension is installed in Google Sheets, but there's one step that you need to do before you can start querying ChatGPT directly, and that is to set up an API key. The way it works in the backend is that OpenAI provides you a key. When you set up an account initially, you get a bunch of free credit to try out OpenAPI calls for ChatGPT. And so what we're going to do is to generate a key and then input it in this application. That's going to let Google Sheets query ChatGPT for anything that you need. That's the only setup that's needed here, and we don't store anything. It's all on your Google account and not in our servers. So we're going to go ahead and get the OpenAPI key from here. Just doing control click. It opens up a new tab here. This directly logged into my account on OpenAI, and it's taken me to the API keys page. So if you look here, it lists a bunch of keys that you can generate. So we're going to go ahead and create a new key. You can create as many keys as you want. So once this key is generated, copy it back here and click the check button to see if this is a valid key. Let's say you made a typo or whatever and missed something. This check can make sure that your key is actually accurate. So make sure that's checked and then hit the save button. This is going to make sure the API key is saved and ready for any future queries. So with that, let's get started with our queries. So the first thing I want to walk us through is the most basic form of just asking ChatGPT anything. This is very similar to what you might do if you log into the playground on the OpenAI website and just chat with ChatGPT. So here we're going to ask it a simple question to explain how magnets work in three short sentences. We've exposed functionality through Excel API calls or functions. So you can see a bunch of functions by just using the prefix ChatGPT here. So for this one, I'm just going to do the basic ChatGPT call, which treats the query as just any freeform question that you have. We asked ChatGPT here for three short sentences on how magnets work, and you can see how it's given a basic description of magnets based on our question. Now, you could go ahead and modify this to be something else, let's say rockets, and ChatGPT is gonna, I mean, our API call is gonna go out again to ChatGPT to produce this new output for you. All right. So that's the basic action that someone might want to do. But we're going to talk more about how ChatGPT can be much more powerful in an application like Google Sheets by going over some of the extra things we can do. So let's hop on to the next thing I wanted to demonstrate, and that's how you can generate content. So here we have an example where you want to generate multiple things. Now here I've taken the example of a flower shop. This could be creative content. This could be content that you want to compose and send folks, like an email or a set of tweets that you want to send out. And it could be just free from anything that you can imagine. Here we're going to make sure these outputs are not just restricted to a single cell, but output to multiple cells in Excel, on top of which you can apply formulas later. And for that, we're going to use the ChatGPT list call. And what that does is to generate a bunch of output that goes into different rows on the Excel sheet. Now it's come up with some decent names for a flower shop, but I wanted to show you the power of prompt engineering here. So instead of saying generate 5 names for a flower shop, I'm just gonna add a little bit extra here and say make it sound upbeat. And just with that, you kind of see how ChatGPT has made slightly more upbeat answers here. It talks about dreams and perfection. It's trying to make things sound more appropriate. And I think this is a great feature. You could make your brand or query be developed appropriate to what you want to show. Let's talk about a slightly different extension of this function. So with ChatGPT, the other thing you can do, with the formula that we've built, is to also do multi-selects on different cells. So for example, here I have a prompt that says generate wholesome quotes, and then I have a bunch of different locations here. I want the prompt to be specific to this location or another 20 locations that someone might add here. So let's see how that's going to work. I'm going to say ChatGPT, call out the prompt, comma, and mention the second prompt here as well. So with that, you can see how it picks out a local celebrity in Atlanta and says, a famous quote from them. And just similarly, you can extend this same formula to one or more rows, and you've got just one shot where um, you can set up formulas and then have multiple answers being generated for different input that you pass in the rows. So that was a demonstration of ChatGPT list, which builds out answers in a set of rows, and also ChatGPT with multiple inputs in the cells or multiple cells as input. All right, let's move on. Now we get into some exciting applications in terms of data cleanup and processing with ChatGPT. Something that might have been a very complex Excel formula now becomes a very simple ChatGPT call to say, look at all these examples that I have for you and make sure all the subsequent cells are also processed accordingly. In this case, we have an example of an email list with different formatting around it. Sometimes the names included, sometimes emojis are included. Some of these have mistakes where this should be sandwich dot shop, but that's missing. So there's a bunch of mistakes here that we've kind of shown ChatGPT, the right form of doing this. And then we basically ask ChatGPT to extrapolate that information using the ChatGPT fill query, show ChatGPT all of the inputs, and then ask for an output for this particular cell. Let's see how that works. So we can see how it ignored the name that was in the latter part of the cell. It also made sure to fill in a .org. Note how we never had an org domain here. There was just the sandwich shop as an example. But ChatGPT is smart enough to figure out that an the dot needs to go after greendale.org. So you can extend that again to the next query that we have here. Very similar. I'm just gonna give another example here. That's gonna show us how it's able to clean up some of this, content that shouldn't be here as well. A similar extrapolation here, but on data that might be, not being cleaned up, but being extrapolated based on existing information. So here I've got company, product, and headquarters. I'm calling out, different companies that have been, having some of the most popular products in the world. So we're going to extend this and ask ChatGPT to fill in data for Amazon here and see how that works. So you can see how it predicts that Amazon is a retail shop, and um, extend that again to its headquarters. And there we go. It correctly identifies Seattle as the headquarters for Amazon. And this is, I'm demonstrating with a single example here, but this can be very powerful where we have multiple different rows that are being extrapolated for. And with just a simple click, you can take advantage of all the knowledge that's been encoded into ChatGPT. We're going to talk about another very interesting example here, particularly useful for folks who might want to have their text proofread. In this case, if I've written down a text that's grammatically incorrect and has a bunch of errors in punctuation and whatnot, this is going to give you an example of how ChatGPT can fix this sentence almost like Grammarly, I'd say. Gives a pretty concise explanation of what we're trying to do here. And this can easily be done with the ChatGPT fix command that we built for you. I think this is one of the most powerful applications in terms of how ChatGPT can be used today. Next, we're going to talk about how ChatGPT can help you summarize long text. This might be a long web page or a long paragraph that you just want to simplify and understand quickly. And we built a function called summarize for this, which basically takes in the input and prints out a shorter version of it that's easier to read and simpler to understand. So you'll notice how I didn't have a super long text here, and the summary of it also wasn't that much shorter. So this is a nice function for us to talk about some of the other things that you can do with the API. Um, so if you click on the prompt here, it kind of shows you how we've basically been using the input function so far, but there's a few additional optional parameters here. So we were always passing an input, which was the cells, but you can see how it has a max tokens field, which represents the size of the output you expect. It's actually the size of the input and the output put together, but this is something we can control to make sure the output is within a limit. I also want to talk about this field that we call temperature. Temperature represents how creative your model is going to get. It's a number between 0 and 1, with 0 being least creative, most predictable responses that sound very close to the input that's passed, and a number close to 1 represents something that makes ChatGPT get more and more creative, which might make it more unreasonable as well. So a default value of zero point 0.7 is what we use here, and you're free to change that and pass that in as a particular value here. The last thing is the model name. We use the most accurate and powerful model in ChatGPT right now, which is text C003. But this lets you change that if you need to. So having talked about that, let's talk about how you can take advantage of it for summarizing this text to be even shorter. So here I'm going to choose this text. Oops. Okay, let's do this again. So originally our formula was ChatGPT summarized in just the cell. Now we're going to pass in max tokens. By default, we set this to around 200. Here I'm going to say 40 to make this a very crisp output. And you can see how it's made it very simple and kept it to just a single sentence. This extension of optional parameters is available for every single function that we've talked about until now. Okay, next we're going to talk about this functionality to elaborate. Now think of elaborate as a way for you to um, basically get a long form answer out of ChatGPT. This might be the essay topic that you're gonna write for, or it could be a simple prompt like this one. So with this, I'm gonna pass in the cell. I'm gonna also pass in um, max tokens to demonstrate to you how things would work if I passed in many more tokens. In this case, it's going to take full advantage of the extra tokens that I'm passing in. I'm going to pass in something that's even more creative. So we're going to pass it zero point 0.9. I'm just going to leave the model default. So let's see what the output looks like here. It's taking a bit of time because it's going to be a much longer output. And you can see how it's taken advantage of the bigger character space that we offered it using the max tokens field. Um, well, it looks like a pretty nice summary. Also calls out personalities like the Joker, Harley Quinn, Darth Vader. So it completely understands what the question is and also gives a very reasonable answer for it. All right, let's talk about some other extensions here. So another interesting way to use this is to take advantage of the fact that ChatGPT has been trained on data from different languages and use it as a translator for us. So we've built the ChatGPT translate function that's going to take as input two fields as required, which is the text that you want to translate and the language that we want to pass. So in this case, we're just going to get a French translation for this sentence, and let's try to change that around to make another answer here, and that's how you say that. How are you today in Japanese? So you can imagine how you can extend this to multiple languages here. Sorry, not English, but Spanish or French and so on. And this becomes a single query or spot for you to generate a bunch of different answers that you can then translate, I'm sorry, then transfer to other places where you want to use it. Okay. The other thing we want to talk about is how ChatGPT is very smart about reading text and understanding the sentiment of it, the positivity or the negativity that's conveyed in each of these, um, in a review, for example. So if you walk through Amazon reviews or Yelp reviews and you wanted to understand what the overall sentiment was, maybe you have a product and you want to understand what people like and dislike about it, ChatGPT can be a great tool to find that out. Here, I've got a text that is about a person enjoying some desert, and we're going to say ChatGPT analyze sentiment of this. You're going to see how it identifies the sentiment as positive. Similarly, if we change this around to something that that we don't like. Let's just try to change this around. So if we do this, we can see how sentiment is correctly analyzed to be negative. The part of putting these together in sheets is how you can import a bunch of reviews, let's say, product reviews, and analyze all of them in one place, maybe graph those out as a pie chart and see what's working and what's not working. The last thing I want to talk about today is how you can freeze your results to avoid recomputation. Now, for many of the functions that we walked through today, we saw that you have a formula in place, and when the input changes, your output also is reloaded, which means you're making repeated calls to ChatGPT, which has you know, two consequences. The first is that the answer that you saw and thought that it was great and you wanted to present to your friends might be different from what is displayed after a recomputation. So you might get something slightly different, and it might not be exactly what you wanted to present. The second thing is the cost associated with repeated calls to ChatGPT. So to prevent both of those, you can freeze results, and I'm going to demonstrate that in this example. So here is a prompt to say, give me the 5 dishes I can make given these ingredients. I'm going to say um, ChatGPT list, choose this, pass in a set of cells, and this should give me a bunch of outputs. So you can see how this is just based on the formula right now. But if I wanted to freeze the inputs, what I can do is to go to the extensions GPT to work and say either freeze the values in the selection or in the entire sheet. Let's do both. So I'm going to say freeze values in the selection. And you can see how this formula was replaced with just the answer there, which consequently affected the rest of the values as well. So let's reload that again. And this time we're going to say freeze values in the entire sheet. And with that, we see how the formula vanished and got replaced by different values that we'd actually acquired. So that concludes our demo today. Let's do a quick summary of all the things that are possible with the GPT to Work add-on on Google Sheets. Firstly, you can use this to make any query, any free-form query that you like can be executed with the equal to ChatGPT function call. You can generate content. This could be listed out to make sure it can, be more easily used in the rest of the Excel flow, or to just make things cleaner for you to make decisions rather than in a single cell. We have answers out in a bunch of different cells. A nice way to use this can also be to say, give me 4 suggestions for a tweet I should post for Mother's Day. And it's going to give you 4 different options for you to choose from. So instantly, instead of having to ask ChatGPT for multiple results each time, you have just one call and then you have multiple results for it, allowing you to choose from the options available. We talked about how you can, the formula is flexible in accepting not just a single cell, but multiple cells, or a choice of, a primary cell and secondary cells. We talked about how ChatGPT can help cleaning up data. This has tremendous applications in terms of data processing and cleanup. You don't really need to come up with complex Excel formulas to handle bad data. You can just give it a few examples, and then it is smart enough to identify things based on your examples and its knowledge from before. This greendale.org was an example of that. In terms of extrapolating data, you pass it enough data, and it's able to use its knowledge to extend that and talk about what exactly a particular choice might fill for these. You can use ChatGPT for grammar correction, almost as a replacement for Grammarly, and for nearly free. You can use this to summarize long terms of text. This is a simple example. You can control the output using the max tokens parameter. You can control how smart it gets or how creative it gets with the temperature parameter. You can add extra um, um, or play around with the extra knobs that we have here in terms of the model. The Da Vinci model is the most sophisticated and powerful model that's available now. But if you have concerns, or if a better model comes along, you can move along and try the different model as well. Similarly, we have the elaborate functionality, which takes an input prompt. Again, it can accept a variety of optional parameters to make the output smaller or longer. We talked about the translate functionality. Um, this lets you use ChatGPT's knowledge of different languages to your advantage, and um, it's a tool where you can have several languages being translated to from a single prompt. Another example is how you can use this to analyze sentiments. Maybe you have a bunch of reviews that you want to analyze and it's all been dumped into an Excel sheet. This is a great add-on that can help you analyze everything in one place and probably put it into a graph. Finally, we talked about how you can freeze results to avoid the recomputation cost and also to just stick to final results that you just want to take home. Thanks again for joining us. For any question, you can go look at the gpt.work.com website. The setup page should have instructions on how to install. The troubleshooting and FAQ page have more answers for problems you may run into or questions you may have. Thanks again for trying our extension.